So here we go, video 4 of my story. Tonight's video is probably going to be kind of hard for me to make because we're coming up on the holidays, and as I said in my previous video, my first marriage started out on a bunch of red flags. What I didn't get to yesterday was it wasn't just me and her that this affected. She had 2 children when I met her that I took in as stepchildren to the best of my ability. And then her and I had a miscarriage very early in our relationship. And that one was difficult, but at that point in time, I didn't process it. It just turned into anger, and I went on about life. And about a month and a half ago, her and I were having a conversation, and it got brought up. And I had not even thought about it since that point in time until a month and a half ago. And a month and a half ago, it tore me apart like it had happened that day. A few months later, we wound up pregnant with a second child, and he was born, and he was healthy, and he was little, but he was sweet and wonderful. And I continued to throw around frustration and anger, and the red flag never went down. It stayed up for the better part of our marriage of 13 years. So her oldest son was, if I remember correctly, about 13 when I came into his life, and he and I never had a parent-child relationship. It was always more of a friend relationship. Her youngest child at that time was 5, and her and I did have more of a parent-child relationship. Unfortunately, it wasn't a good one. And then when my son came along, he and I obviously had a parent-child relationship, and to some extent we still do. But I did a lot of damage, and because of that damage, our relationship, in fact my relationship with everybody in that family scenario, is very thready a lot of the time. And I can't blame anybody but me, because it was my fault. I wasn't true to myself, and instead of being authentic, I just let the anger and the rage and the fear hold me back. I guess her and I had been together for about 2.5 years, and there was some unique experimentation. And then I told her, I said, I think that there's more to it than just experimentation. At this point, I still didn't know what it was, but we started doing a little bit of research. And as we did that little bit of research, we started to put a title to it. And as I started to get comfortable with the idea that I could exist happily like that, it freaked her out. Respectfully, it freaked her out. I mean, she expected to marry a man, and she thought she did, and she didn't really. So she tried to let the world know that I was transgender, and I pretty promptly made her look like she was crazy and didn't know what she was talking about. And I hid back in my shell. And when I hid back in this shell this time, I turned on the hypermasculinity, and Leslie shut completely off. There was no Leslie to be shown. Because of this, the alcohol consumption increased, the anger and the frustration increased. There was no real outlet at this point in time, because I had moved past the ideation of wanting to be suicidal to arrogant, stereotypical, hyper-masculine, entitled male. And that caused a lot of problems for my family. It created expectations that were unachievable and unattainable. It created a walk on eggshells event for a huge part of those kids growing up and the relationship between her and I. And I wound up drinking and making some threats, and I wound up in jail, and I spent about, I want to say 6 months total in jail. And then I got out of jail, and I worked on turning my life around and got some anger management. And the thing about the anger management was I went to the courses and I saw the counselor, and the counselor gave me an easy sign off on it, because the counselor didn't see any anger, because I turned on Leslie and I kind of pushed Todd back. I had time to do that while I was sitting in a jail cell. And so the counselor didn't see the anger that everybody else saw. And I didn't want to be there, so I just let the Leslie side of me take over and deal with that situation. And I did. So he signed off on it, and life went on. And I got a job, and then we wound up enduring a flood. That was a huge event. And then we moved back to where we had previously been. And then we moved to Colorado, and we spent almost a year in Colorado. Well, I came up before and started working so that we could establish some funds and get everything situated. And then we came up here for about a year, at which point that company had folded up. And I tried to find a job, but I really didn't have my heart in it, and so it didn't work. And we wound up going back to Arkansas. Everything was really rocky for the next several years. Back to alcohol consumption, back to causing problems. But I had started drawing again, and it was a little bit helpful to sit and start drawing again, because it gave me a outlet. And because I had that outlet, I didn't put the anger anywhere but on paper most of the time. I drew, and when I wasn't drawing, I was insufferable, or I was working. And I worked a lot of long hours all of the time, because I didn't like hurting the people around me, but I had a knack for being able to hurt the people around me, especially the ones that I claim to have loved the most.